Welcome to the Wicked Problems podcast, where we are continuing to dive into the complex, multi-layered challenges of the EV electric vehicle world. In this episode, I'm joined by Vicky Edmonds, CEO of EVA England, an organisation dedicated to representing the voice of current and future electric vehicle drivers. EVA England plays a crucial role in shaping EV policy, advocating for consumer rights and ensuring that the transition to electric mobility is as seamless as possible. In this conversation, Vicky sheds light on some of the biggest challenges facing EV adoption today, from the persistent issues of range anxiety and charging infrastructure to the disparity in costs between home and public charging. She also highlights the importance of accessibility in the EV landscape, ensuring that charging solutions cater to all drivers, including those with disabilities. We discussed the role of government policy, the influence of local authorities, and the need for better industry engagement to enhance the overall EV driver experience. And of course, we explore how EVA England is working to break through the noise and bring the real concerns of EV drivers to the forefront. If you've ever wondered what's really holding back mass EV adoption or how we can make the transition to electric vehicles fairer and more efficient, this episode's for you. So, without further ado, let's dive in. I nearly said drive in. Here's my conversation with Vicky Edmonds. Welcome, Vicky. It's lovely to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Thank you. It's good to be here. Tell me a little bit more, and the viewers and listeners, a little bit more about EVA England, how it came to be, what its function is, what you do within that.
Thanks. So EVA England we call ourselves the voice of the EV driver, but it's really the voice of current and future EV drivers. So we're there to represent that voice when it comes to trying to affect policy and regulatory change, mainly within the government sphere, so sort of local and national government, but also we do have a sort of industry-facing bent where actually we want to make sure that industry understand what the drivers are thinking about the EV market and making sure that they're responding to their needs. So we're very much in the trade body world. So we're a membership organisation. We have 500-ish paying members. We also have collaborations and networks out to lots of other drivers through other campaigns such as the Women Drive Electric campaign, which I quote a lot because it's a really good campaign. And we take all of the information that drivers give us and we use that to identify what the real problems that drivers are facing on the network are and how to make the transition to electric smoother for current and future EV drivers.
So that membership is a membership of EV drivers or EV drivers and organisations, or?
No, so we are we are uniquely the driver's voice. So we are independent of companies. So we are not funded by any particular company. So we can actually say, we can retain that neutrality so that when we're speaking, we're actually speaking for the individual and for the consumer. So we sort of position ourselves as a consumer champion trade body and make sure that the consumer's voice is heard amongst some of the noise that goes on out there.
Okay, excellent. And you've got about, I think you said 500 members. Did you say that?
About 500, 500 and ticking upwards at the moment. And those are our paying members who are quite active in the space. And then, as I say, it's the networks out to wider drivers groups that are also really important because some of those groups have people who've not yet purchased an EV and have a really valid concern that we want to try to provide reassurance on, or actually say to policymakers and regulatory makers that, these are the big barriers facing kind of the market at the moment. And I can talk a little bit about those and some of the work we're doing on those.
I'd love to get into some of that, absolutely. And hopefully, as we, when we put this out, people become more aware of you. Maybe, I never know, maybe you'll get some more members.
Indeed. Yeah, that would be cool.
Do please tell me about the work you do, some of the challenges that you're facing, that your drivers, your members are facing, and how you're trying to help them overcome those.
Yes, we regularly survey drivers, both our members and the wider driving community. And I think we have, I say, two kind of buckets of drivers, if I could call them, or groups of driver. So one of the non-electric drivers, so the people who haven't quite made the leap to electric yet. And so we try to dig into why that is. So a recent flash survey that we did showed that for those drivers, so the non-EV drivers, there are two big barriers still facing them, which is upfront purchase cost of the vehicle. So even though, we hear a lot about how total cost of ownership is much cheaper for electric, it's that upfront cost that is still preventing a big barrier to people making the leap. And the second issue for non-EV drivers is range anxiety, because they still don't understand the charging network. They don't understand how the cars work. They don't really have a feel for what range means. and the fact that you don't need to plug in every night depends on kind of your personal kind of driving habits and where you're going and your commuting patterns. And so they have a particular group of barriers that we try to put proposals into government. So recently the government ran its OZEV mandate consultation, and we put proposals into how to address some of those barriers. And then our other group of drivers are the current EV drivers, and they face different problems. So when you talk to current EV drivers, and we put a press notice out recently, 3 out of 4 of them think that the cost of public charging is presenting a major issue at the moment and is a major concern for them. For those who have driveways, which is about 60% of the population, but about 80% of EV drivers, then you can benefit from cheaper kind of domestic energy tariffs, and you can charge your car for as little as 7p per kilowatt hour. For those who don't have access to that sort of off-street driveway or offering, then public charging costs at the moment can be quite prohibitive. So, if you're out on the network, we've seen costs as high as 85p per kilowatt hour. So that's quite a big gap. So for them, kind of narrowing that charging divide and giving people access. So we do a lot of work on trying to understand what the different options are. So not about just bringing the cost of public charging down, because that's important, but you'll never get complete price parity with a domestic home tariff. So how do you allow people without drivers to access that tariff when they are residents trying to charge? So they're not just en route and on a journey, they're actually, this is their main source of refueling. And so we talk a lot about the kind of cross-pavement technologies that allow people to access their tariffs. We talk a lot about workplace charging, and we talk a lot about the industry responding to that challenge and coming up with residential preferential tariffs and ways of allowing residents to charge at affordable rates. So that's one big issue for the current EV driver. And then there's lots of other things like accessibility to charge points, which is if you're a user with a disability. At the moment, there are very few charge points that meet the standard that's there for accessibility, which is the PAS 1899 standard. So we're doing a lot of work with colleagues across the industry and government to try to make sure that there is a standard that people can meet, that people with disabilities can access charge points, can use them. And that's a really important piece of work that I don't think gets talked about enough, where a bit of momentum and a bit of recognition of that work and a bit of support in moving it forward, making sure that charge points are rolled out that all users can access is really, really critical.
I saw a report yesterday, I think it was published yesterday morning in the press, saying that it was reporting the work of a committee of MPs, and it was saying that there was not a single public charge point that met the accessibility standards in the UK at this moment in time, which I thought was shocking.
Yeah, so that's the Public Accounts Committee report, where they sort of did a hearing, and I think OZEV officials, government officials, went to the hearing and presented evidence to them, and the National Audit Office did a kind of pre-report back before Christmas. So accessibility standards are, yes, it is not good. There are a couple of charge point operators who are meeting the standard, but when you've got over 75,000 public charge points out there, you're talking about kind of a handful that are meeting the standard, and that's not good enough for the consumer. But part of the issue is that the parts of the charge points are made abroad, and they are made to different international standards. So whilst the UK is trying to be at the forefront of this, it's going to be tricky and it's going to be knobbly, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it, and we shouldn't try to strive for something that all users can access. So the work that's going on now is to trying to put a standard in place that works for users, but also charge point companies can meet because they can access the parts, and hopefully improve that over time so that all CPOs and manufacturers are meeting what is the sort of the final standard where we want to get to. And I think we as EVA England will be pushing for that to be continually monitored, making sure that it is reviewed, it is revised when it's needed to, and making sure that users can actually are actually benefiting from it, because I think that's going to be really important going forward.
How do you think government is reacting to? I mean, you talked a minute ago about the disparity in experience for people who have a driveway and for those who don't, and some of the reasons are commercial, right? It costs more to put infrastructure in that is not in the home, for example, and therefore that's going to create an uplift in the cost of the utilising that infrastructure. Maybe there's the subsidies that could be brought in, or there's some other policy actions that could be taken, because it's things like, I'm thinking about 20% VAT versus 5% on a home tariff. those sorts of things, or subsidies, or well, I know I live in London. I've got an EV. Source London, or Total Energies is now, if I have a parking permit, I get a discount on the tariff on the street from one of their chargers versus, if I don't have that. What are the sorts of things that you think could be being done that maybe aren't being done that it would be great to see?
Yeah, and I should declare up front that I am former government as well. So I spent many years inside government, so I understand some of the challenges that officials face when they're trying to pull together different factors and find a way through, and some of the law planning permissions and laws around these issues, landowner rights, can get really difficult to unpick. I actually put a post on LinkedIn about this today. So I think so. There's first of all bringing down the cost of charging anyway. And we talk a lot about VAT, which, as you say, is 20% on the public network, whereas it's only 5% on domestic charging. Even if you reduce that, which VAT is a difficult tax to tangle with, and many people have asked for it for a very long time, and it's never quite taken forward. Even if you tackle that, I think we as consumers still don't have a good enough understanding of the rest of the cost stack, it's called, that makes up the price per kilowatt hour for a consumer. So it's not just about VAT, it's about the sort of the contracts that are negotiated, the standing charges, the capacity charges, which are all to do with electricity markets, which is really complicated. And even having worked in government and had the odd meeting with Ofgem, I wouldn't profess to understand it at all. And I think it's just trying to, from a consumer point of view, trying to understand that and trying to unpick that and try to understand what the proportion of the cost that makes up and what levers government are pulling on that is really important. I think we are probably going to target that, because there are many people talking about VAT, and of course we join them, but an understanding of that kind of cost of electricity and what is being done to make charging cheaper, or what's driving those expensive costs, and how could you sort of tackle those challenges, I think is going to be really important. But as I say, even then, you won't get complete price parity with the really cheap domestic tariffs. And that's where some of the work that government are doing around trying to promote innovative solutions like cross-pavement technologies is important. I think the issue there comes very much down, as I say, to planning. There is no lack of will, I don't think, to try to tackle this, at least from the government and the consumer and the resident end. I still see too many of my members sending us emails saying that they've applied for a cross-pavement solution and the council have just said no. And that, I think, is a really difficult, and it's a range of factors. So it's to do with insurance costs, it's to do with liabilities, it's to do with planning laws, but it's just difficult. So some councils are very progressive on this and are really working hard to trial these solutions or to put the right solutions in place. Others are not, and that at least allows a resident to connect their car to their home tariff. So it allows them to take advantage of cheaper electricity rates. And then, but cross-pavement won't be the answer for anyone either, and that's why we also focus very much on the workplace charging scheme and getting workplaces to put charge points in, because they're often done at cheaper rates, and making sure that enough businesses are aware of it, are taking advantage of it, that we've seen this amazing kind of success of the state-funded sort of OZEV have given a separate pot to schools to place charge points in, and that seems to be proving to be really successful. So one of the things that we've asked government for is, can you extend that to other state-funded institutions, particularly NHS sites, where I think there's real demand for charging on site. So there's a lot of things that can be done around that. And then on the kind of charge point operator side or the industry side, I think we are starting to see charge point companies respond to this challenge and think about their offerings to residents. And we've had a few conversations with a couple of charge point operators recently where they're coming up with really innovative solutions that are actually striving to give residents that kind of cheaper, as close as you can get to that residential kind of off-street tariff. So I think there's like a menu of options, and no one size fits all for the consumer. The consumer, people live in very different areas. They have very different driving habits. They need confidence that they can charge at affordable rates. They need confidence to access the chargers, but no one size fits all. So that's why I think for the charging world, it's important to have that menu of options available for people.
It can get very complicated. You talked about the stack of things that lead into the pricing, and that I know it is very complicated, right? So for illustrative purposes, you've also got things like, well, the price of electricity is pegged at the back end to the price of gas. You've got different types of fuel. You've got that generate and demand onto the grid, and so on and so on, regional differentiation, and the list goes on, which can make it very complex for, let's say, me as a consumer to understand what on earth's going on and how much it's going to cost me and how difficult it is for me. And you were mentioning there the differences between different local councils. And I think one of the issues that we had before perhaps Levi came along, which is the local funding for local government, was that the progressive councils would be progressive because they had somebody who understood EV or wanted to champion it rather than any other reason. And I think, is there a shift in that now with things like Levi and other policy changes where actually we can see there's more uniformity coming along through the different councils?
I'd like to say yes. I mean, so I think what Levi did is I don't know if this has happened everywhere, but the idea of EV officers kind of actually funding some capability in local authorities so that you had some resource to actually think about this. And I think Levi has tried to do that as well. So as you say, you've got the skills and the resource inside the local authority. I still think it's very patchy, and some councils are very up for this and very willing to try. Others are kind of, I don't want to be the first mover because if there are any problems, I don't want to be on my turf. And then there are others who are very, I don't know if regressive is the right word, but just very kind of just not really shifting. And the responses that residents are getting are just quite stubborn. And just as a consumer who is desperate to buy an EV, but wants to apply for this solution that you're being told by government is available, there is a fund available for cross-pavement solutions, to then spend money on the application and simply be told, no, it's too difficult, is just really frustrating, and it turns people off electric cars. And it's something actually as EVA England we would like to dig into a bit more, because we hear a lot. We don't know exactly what the kind of ground looks like on that. I've been to a seminar hosted by the Energy Savings Trust on this, where I think most local authorities were quite keen to discuss this, and just I think we can certainly offer ourselves out as EVA England to talk to local authorities and bring them the residents' view and make sure they understand where drivers are coming from. But I think the kind of the blanket no is just really frustrating and needs to be called out a little bit.
I mean, your organisation thinks from the driver's perspective, and I was at what would I call it? I would call it a sort of a thinking group or a symposium or something. I don't know. It's not a think tank, but it was just a collection of people brought together to think about the payment experience, because that can be somewhat different depending on the charge point operator that you're using and so on. Do you think that there is more work to be done? Not just, I don't just mean from payments, but just generally across the experience. I mean, we've talked about pricing and accessibility, but are there other things that you can think of? Like, is there a lot more work still to be done, or are we getting there?
I sort of think, I wish that some of us had been around when, the motor car first appeared on the scene, because I'm sure it wasn't that smooth then either. And I think we're learning about a completely new technology, which requires a completely different way of kind of use to a combustion engine car, a completely different type of kind of refueling. And so there are just going to be lots of teething problems. And I think, I as a driver completely accept that we're still in the first sort of decade of real ramp up, and there are going to be teething problems. I think the point is that we need to be on them and we need to be trying to respond to them as quickly as possible. So when it comes to the driver's experience, I think the other niggles that our members and other drivers are facing are absolutely. So you've touched on payment. So, charge points below 8 kilowatts don't have to offer contactless. I think some do, not many. And it's just really complicated, different apps still around. And although the government has these regulations where charge point operators are supposed to allow access to kind of third-party providers, so these roaming solutions, it's not really working out on the network for people. So we still have lots of complaints saying that they still have to use multiple apps and multiple cards. The idea is that you're supposed to be able to use a single card, and some people can and some people can't. So there's definitely a problem at that end of the charging sector, and that's the end to which residents are charging at. So that's something that needs to be thought about. The other issue, the payment process you've touched on, and I think there's some work going on that, but things like pre-authorization codes and just the complication of it, like people don't really understand why their credit card is being billed before they've even charged. So I think there's just a lot of communication and transparency for consumers about why they're being asked to do these things. And unless you work in this world, you often don't know and you don't understand it. And a lot of EV drivers are still very enthusiastic about kind of having an EV, so they're willing to put up with a little bit of pain. But as you enter mass market, that's not necessarily going to be the case. So those issues definitely need to be sorted out. And then signage, we should touch on signage. I mean, there's the kind of, why haven't we got EV charging signs when we have refueling signs everywhere, when this is the future of road transport, is a really good question. And what's the kind of strategy for tackling that, both at local and national levels, so at local road network, national road network, but also just when you're going into a car park, a lot of our members say, well, it's, it's who can spot the charger? You can't find it. You're kind of driving around. So I think just guiding people to them and just making the experience better. And you don't face those issues when you pull up to a petrol station. And we do really need to try to work hard to make this experience as attractive as possible to the 20% of people who have said they'll never buy an EV yet, which was another report that came out this week, because we have to persuade them that these are good cars and that they work and that they're easy to use.
I saw, I won't name the company, but I saw a company put a post on LinkedIn this week, I think it was, and they had erected a sign that complied with the road signage rules, and the council had ordered them to take it down. And then there was the interesting thing was, it's not, is the council stupid for doing that, blah, blah, blah. It was that, well, the council had to get them to take it down because it hadn't been put up with authorization. And there's all sorts of, you get into this sort of very complex world of what are the regulations around road signage. And there's all sorts of things like, what angle is the sign at? Does it obscure something in the background? Has it got the right torque so that the wind can't blow it off? Has that been measured? And it's a sort of world of things that you would never have thought about yourself. And perhaps that charging company hadn't. I don't know. Maybe they had. You can see how, like, every small little area that you go to, you peel it back and then you peel it again and then you peel it again. And every now and again, as somebody once said to me, it's like an onion, it makes you cry. It's not just the layers. And because it is super, super complex, and it's seemingly simplistic on the surface, but it is very, very complex. I think that signage one's really important. The other one that I saw somebody talking about not long ago was, if I'm driving down the motorway or if I'm driving through town and I go past a petrol station, there's a totem that tells me how much per litre I'm going to pay for petrol. There's nothing telling me how much I'm going to pay for electricity. And sometimes there's not even a thing there telling me that they do it. Often there is, but sometimes there isn't.
I think we have a stat in our report to the ZEV mandate consultation that there's something like, nearly 90 motorway service areas or kind of service stations on the motorway network. And only 13 of those have EV signage, which is pretty poor. For as I say, for the future of road transport, we ought to be thinking now about how to roll this out. But you're right. I always see, again, having been in government, regulations and frameworks and standards are there to protect the consumer. So as a consumer body, we support the kind of concept of having regulations in place because it helps us, because it makes sure that we are, that we are protected and our rights are protected and we're not overly paid. But I think in some areas of the charging industry, in the kind of the EV world, those regulations are coming and they're being worked on. And then in other areas, they're prohibitive, and signage is probably one of them, where it's just really detailed and how you work around it. But from a consumer point of view, I think kind of government and industry, I'm sure they do understand, but consumers just don't care about that. They just want to know where these charge points are. And so we do need to have a way of solving those problems and making sure that signs are rolled out. And whether that's, I know there are many in the industry trying to work on this and look at it, but, I think it would be good to see some transparency over what's being done. And it would be good to understand and some communications about how to solve this problem. Because, as I say, with any emerging market, you tick off one problem and then the next one emerges. And we've got to keep talking about those problems, but also talking about how we're on them and how we're actually tackling them. Because obviously you're going to have them, but actually we know what they are and we're still trying to work on behalf of the consumer to make this an easier experience.
Do you think because there's a lot of negativity reported sometimes in the press about, range anxiety or difficulty in one way or another of owning an EV. A lot of it doesn't seem to be that well thought through or that true, in fact. But do you think there's enough being done to celebrate the good stuff that is happening? Because there are problems being solved, right? It's not, if we wind the clock back 5 years, well, we're a long way from that now. Things are much easier. There's way more public charge points available than there were even 2 years ago.
I mean, I definitely don't think that we are seeing the positive in the mainstream press. I mean, when I took this job on, I think one of my reflections, so I'd had a career break from government before taking this job, and I was on the board of EVA England, and one of my reflections, kind of sitting slightly kind of outside the industry, kind of looking in for a while, was that the EV sector is a little bit of an echo chamber. So we all know what's going on, and we all talk to each other, but breaking out into the mainstream and making sure that the national press sort of picks up on those positive stories just seems to be really quite difficult. And the headlines are still quite negative. So the PAC report, for example, is a classic one where the report itself just threw up some important points that we've all got to discuss. But the reporting around it was very sensationalist, because it's clickbait and people want you to click on their articles. And I think that's driving the sort of negative stories. But if you're a consumer and you're reading that, you're like, oh, well, EVs they're really bad still, so I'm not going to buy one. And I think we forget about that. And I'd say the same goes for negative stories around, the ZEV mandate targets back before Christmas and the kind of, are they, aren't they, will they, won't they? It's just not helpful. And if you're trying to sell cars and you're trying to get people into them, you need to have a really steady narrative that this is a good industry to be entering, that these cars work for the people buying them, because it's so easy for any uncertainty to just proliferate across the consumer market. And we spend a lot of our time trying to reassure people and managing complaints. And I think industry sort of also kind of needs to do its part around that as well. And try and get some of those good messages out there.
So let's talk about industry for a second, because you talked about policy advocacy with government. You talked about some of the problems that drivers face. But I wonder, do you do work with manufacturers, with charge point operators, with other actors, the OEMs or the manufacturers of the charge points themselves, other actors in the EV space, based on the feedback that you get from your customers? And do you think there is more that they could be doing to make sure that they are, let's say, fit for purpose in the eyes of their customers?
Yeah, I mean, I'd very much like to. And I think I feel like we're quite well plugged into the charging industry, for example, I think at the moment, and having lots of really good conversations with the trade bodies on that side and some of the kind of CPOs and the manufacturing bodies. I would like to do more with the vehicle side and the manufacturers on that side. I think the challenges there are a little bit different, and they're a little bit more subtle, and they're down to consumer and customer satisfaction with the product. There's a lot to be done at the dealership end as well. The people selling the cars, you still hear a lot of stories. People walk into showrooms and they're talking to people who trying to sell them a car that they don't understand, and they're often directed away from the car, or you just hear too many anecdotes of people saying, oh, I wouldn't buy an electric car. And that's not good. And I don't see action being taken in those areas particularly visibly in quite the same way as we sort of hear some of the other stories. And I would really like to see that. And I would really like us to be a useful kind of point of contact for those parts of the industry as well, because I think that's really important. I'd say on the consumer body side, obviously we also work with the other consumer bodies in the area who are doing similar things, and they possibly have better reach into those organisations than we do. But I'd really like to sit down with some OEMs and say, well, actually, particularly as a driver of two cars myself, here's what I like about your product and here's what I don't. And I'm sure they do all their own kind of customer surveys, but for those of us who've been driving EVs for nearly 10 years, we've stacked up quite a lot of information about these cars. And we've also seen the market evolve. And I think it would be a really useful conversation to have with them.
So shout out to OEMs and dealerships. Come and talk to Vicky.
Yeah, exactly.
Come and talk to EVA England. There's a lot of good information you could get that maybe helps you uplift your your sales and your product quality and so on.
Yeah.
If people want to know more about EVA England and they want to reach out, where do they go?
Yes, so we have a website. So if you sort of Google EVA England, we should pop up. So that gives you a lot of information about who we are, how to join us, some of the reports that we've done. So obviously the latest big one was the OZEV mandate response, which sort of sets out our stall in a way and the big issues we're campaigning on. When you become a member, then you get access, you're able to attend our town halls. We have workshops with members. We do surveys just for our members. So when we have big pieces of work coming up, and we have a few which we're going to go out and talk to our members about that are in the pipeline. It's a good organisation to be a part of. And at the moment, because we're not so massive, I think every member, I feel, has a voice and they can email us and they can reach out. So all the contact details and all the information is on the website.
So we'll put a link to the website in the show notes so people can click on that. But if someone's listening and they're not actually looking at this on the wickedproblems.fm website, what is the URL? We might as well just spell it out now. evaengland.co.uk?
evaengland.org.uk.
org.uk, evaengland.org.uk. So we will make sure that goes under the show notes, and then people can maybe click through. Those of you who are listening it's evaengland.org.uk. Please go have a look. I don't think membership costs all that much, so it's very affordable for people.
It's £20 a year.
£20 a year. There you go. Bargain.
It is a bargain.
Yeah. And you get to, engage with the industry as an EV driver. So that's great.
Indeed. Yeah.
Vicky, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And best of luck with all the work that you guys do.
Thank you.